Joining me today is David Juvet, who is the Senior Vice President for the Business and Industry Association in New Hampshire. David, thanks for being here.
Certainly.
I really want to talk business. And when I think about, I really want to get sort of growth in New Hampshire. That's what I think that's been on sort of the undercurrents of everybody's thoughts since 2008, right? How do we really get on a growth track in New Hampshire? And we haven't really seen that much growth. And we used to lead the region, and we're not.
Right.
So maybe let's start with sort of the history. What are the dynamics that have shifted where New Hampshire used to be growing faster than Maine and Vermont, and that growth rate sort of deaccelerated? And then that's sort of one piece. And then, okay, how do we get back into the driver's seat?
Right. Well, let's address the first part of the question first, because that's probably the easier to answer. A lot of us who've been either lifelong New Hampshire residents or have lived here for a number of years remember the really extraordinary growth that took place in the 80s and into the early 90s, where we saw both tremendous growth in population and also tremendous job growth, employment growth, and growth in the New Hampshire economy. That was fueled in large part by what was going on with our neighbors, especially Massachusetts in the South. Massachusetts had become a relatively difficult state to do business in, an expensive state to do business in, and a very expensive state to live in. And so we saw a lot of people migrating from Massachusetts into New Hampshire just because, although
the alternative was worse.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was dirt cheap here, but it was much less expensive than Massachusetts, and there was all kinds of entrepreneurial growth that took place in the state. I mean, times were good back then. We've gone through several recessions since then. There was one in the early 90s. It was really real estate focused. There was one in the early 2000s that was tech focused. And then we went through what everyone calls the Great Recession.
Which was everything focused.
Everything focused. It was really a severe recession. And we have come out of that. There is a recovery. New Hampshire's recovered, as have many other states around the country. But the recovery has not been dramatic. It's been slow, steady growth, but not the boom growth of the 1980s, certainly.
So the thesis is we really succeeded not because of what we were doing, but because of what our competitor, or our state to the south, Massachusetts, wasn't doing. Yeah,
and to a certain extent, you asked, what's prohibiting growth now, or what's acting as a governor on growth? And it's almost the same thing in reverse. A number of other states, including Massachusetts, have done a number of different things that make their states more attractive for business, more attractive for population, try to do what they can relating to the cost of living. And that has impacted New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire's trying to do things too, but we need to recognize we're not doing it in a vacuum.
So everything's relative. If the cost to do business were here, regulatory and whatever, and in Massachusetts, and we were here, it dropped. If it's come back here, right now we're below, and we haven't changed.
I wouldn't say
metaphorically.
Yes, there have been some changes, incremental improvements, but some things have gotten worse too. So we can touch on all of those areas.
Okay, so if we got about a minute left in this segment, and we'll get to some of these other areas. But how would you sketch out those changes? The main things we ought to look at.
I think we could look specifically at things impacting a population. So that'll be things like cost of education, cost of housing, cost of electricity. We could look at positive the things that the state is doing to try and market New Hampshire as a more attractive place to do business. But it really gets down to our workforce. And New Hampshire in the 80s and 90s had a very strong workforce that was attractive to employers. We still have a strong workforce, but we don't have a plentiful workforce, and that's a serious issue.
All right, so we're out of time here. When we return, we're going to continue our conversation, and we're going to focus on workforce-related issues. So please stay with us.